Chapter 1. The Wake-Up Call. The alarm rang at 5 a.m., slicing through the darkness like a challenge. Ryan groaned, slapping at his phone, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't just an alarm. It was a declaration of war against his old self. 4 years he had drifted. Waking up late, scrolling through social media before his feet even touched the floor, promising himself, "Tomorrow I'll start." But tomorrow never came. Until today. The night before, something had snapped inside him. After a long day of routine, the same job, the same complaints, the same feeling of running in place, Ryan sat in his car, engine off, and stared at his reflection in the dark window. His own eyes looked back at him, tired but still burning with an ember of ambition. That tiny spark whispered, "You can be more." It wasn't a voice of arrogance. It was the echo of forgotten dreams. He remembered the boy who once stayed up reading biographies of inventors and leaders, who used to ask why the world worked the way it did. Somewhere between adult responsibilities and endless distractions, that boy had vanished. Ryan unlocked his phone and opened a random YouTube video titled, "Educate Yourself Every Day. Change Your Life." It wasn't fancy. Just a man speaking to the camera with quiet certainty. "If you spend 1 hour every day learning something new," the man said, "you'll be ahead of 99% of people in 5 years. Because most will never start." That sentence hit Ryan harder than any motivational speech ever had. 1 hour. 60 minutes. Could something so small change everything? That's why, when his alarm screamed at 5 a.m., Ryan didn't snooze. He got up. He stumbled to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the table with a notebook. On the front cover, he wrote in bold letters, "Project, Rebuild Myself." His first lesson was simple. He would learn about habits. He found a free audiobook and pressed play. The narrator's voice spoke about momentum, consistency, and the power of compounding growth. Ryan listened, not as a student but as a man starving for a new identity. At first, his mind wandered. He wanted to check his phone, stretch, or go back to bed. But every time his thoughts drifted, he whispered to himself, "Stay awake. Stay ahead." By sunrise, he had filled a page with notes, short phrases that sounded almost like commands to his future self. Discipline is not punishment. It's freedom. Small progress beats perfect plans. No one's coming to save you, but you can save yourself. It wasn't much, but it was a start. At work, he felt something unusual, alertness. His mind buzzed with energy. Even when his boss gave him another pile of tedious reports, Ryan found himself thinking differently. What can I learn from this? How can I make this more efficient? For the first time in years, he wasn't just existing. He was observing, questioning, and growing. During lunch, he resisted the urge to gossip with coworkers and instead watched a short video on financial literacy. He didn't understand all the terms, but he jotted down words to Google later: compound interest, index fund, delayed gratification. Each note was a seed planted in the soil of curiosity. That evening, as he drove home, Ryan felt proud. Not because the world had changed, but because he had moved. The tiniest step forward. And that movement was contagious. Still, doubt whispered, "Will you really keep this up?" It was a fair question. Most people start strong and fade fast. Motivation burns bright but dies quickly without a system. Ryan knew that. He had failed many times before. But this time felt different. This time, he wasn't chasing results. He was chasing growth itself. When he reached home, he made a rule, a sacred promise. 1 hour every day for personal education, no matter what. Whether it was reading, listening, or practicing, he would dedicate that hour like a ritual. He called it his power hour. On day 3, Ryan woke up tired. The initial excitement had faded. His brain wanted the old comfort: sleep, distraction, ease. But he pushed through, whispering his new mantra: "If I don't do it today, I'll be the same tomorrow." He studied the basics of communication skills that morning. By the end of the week, he was speaking more clearly during meetings. By week 2, people began to notice. "Ryan, you seem different," his colleague remarked. He smiled. Just learning how to think better. Each chapter of learning built upon the last: confidence, focus, patience. And with each sunrise he realized the truth. Self-education wasn't about reading books. It was about rewriting who you are. Subhook. One night, after 2 months of relentless learning, Ryan received a message from his younger brother. "Bro, how did you change so fast? You're glowing differently." Ryan stared at that text, smiling. He wanted to reply with something profound, but all he typed was, "I stopped wasting hours and I started feeding my mind." That simple truth was his greatest discovery. The difference between those who drift and those who dominate isn't intelligence or opportunity. It's consistency in self-education. Every day, he was stacking bricks of knowledge. Every hour he spent learning widened the gap between who he was and who he was becoming. That night, as he closed his notebook, Ryan looked at the words on the first page again. Project: Rebuild Myself. He smiled. Chapter 1, he whispered. Done. But deep down, he knew the real story had just begun. Because while most people waited for the perfect time to change, he had discovered the secret. The perfect time is every day. Chapter 2, The Momentum Shift. The following weeks tested Ryan's resolve like a storm testing the strength of a ship's sails. The excitement that had once fueled him was fading, replaced by the grind. That invisible wall between who he was and who he was trying to become. It was easy to learn when everything felt new. But now, waking up before dawn felt heavy, robotic. Some mornings, he sat staring at his notebook with an empty mind, the coffee gone cold beside him. He had started this journey to escape mediocrity, but he was realizing something few ever do. Growth isn't glamorous. It's repetition. It's resistance. It's boredom mastered. Still, he refused to give up. One Wednesday morning, after barely sleeping, he considered skipping his power hour. His body screamed for rest. His mind whispered, "You've done enough." But then he remembered something he'd written weeks earlier. Discipline is keeping your promise long after the feeling has left. He dragged himself to the desk, opened his laptop, and began reading an article on productivity. 10 minutes in, something unexpected happened. His energy returned. He was awake, focused, alive again. That's when he understood, momentum doesn't wait for motivation. It's built by motion. Like a rolling train, the hardest part is getting started. Once you move, everything else begins to follow. By week 5, small shifts began appearing in Ryan's life. He didn't notice them all at once, but they were undeniable. He spoke with more confidence during meetings. His ideas started getting attention. The same people who once ignored his suggestions were now nodding when he spoke. Even his boss, Mr. Kent, asked him to help with a new project. But the biggest change wasn't external. It was internal. Ryan started feeling a sense of quiet control over his life. While others complained about the economy, politics, or luck, he had discovered something far more powerful. You can't control the world, but you can always control what you learn. One evening, he visited his old friend, Marcus, a bright guy who always dreamed big but never followed through. Marcus laughed when Ryan mentioned his new morning routine. "Man, 1 hour a day. For what? You think you're gonna be Einstein?" Ryan chuckled. "No. I'm just trying to be smarter than I was yesterday." Marcus shrugged. "You work too hard. Life's meant to be enjoyed." That night, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. Not because Marcus was wrong, but because he represented what most people believed, that learning was for school and once you graduated, the game was over. But Ryan knew better now. The real game had just begun. The next morning, he read a story about a man who learned to code from YouTube tutorials and later built a startup worth millions. Another article told of a woman who read one book a week for 10 years and became a thought leader in her field. Ryan realized these people weren't lucky. They had simply made education a lifestyle, a daily non-negotiable habit. And that's when his second rule was born. Never let a day pass without feeding your future. He wrote it in his notebook in big letters. It became his compass, his shield against procrastination. Whenever laziness tried to whisper, that sentence roared louder. A few weeks later, something profound happened. He was presenting a report to his team, summarizing a new marketing strategy he'd been studying during his morning hours. His presentation was sharp, filled with clear data and confident delivery. When he finished, the room was silent, not because he'd failed, but because everyone was processing his ideas. Then his boss said, "This is the best proposal I've heard in months." Ryan didn't brag. He didn't even smile. He just nodded, knowing it wasn't luck. It was learning. He walked back to his desk, feeling a wave of quiet pride. This was the reward of consistency, results that speak when you don't have to. Later that night, Ryan took a walk through the city streets, earphones in, listening to an audiobook about personal finance. The narrator said, "If you want to change your life, change your daily input. The brain is a sponge. What you soak it in determines how it performs." He paused by a glowing streetlight, replaying that line over and over. It was the same message he'd been living. Garbage in, garbage out. Most people filled their minds with noise, gossip, and complaints. He was filling his with ideas, insights, and tools. That's how you stay ahead of 99% of people. Not by luck, but by input. Subhook. That night, he opened his notebook and drew 2 circles. In the first, he wrote distraction. In the second, education. Then he asked himself, which one am I living in right now? The answer hit him like lightning. Every decision, every hour was a vote for one of those circles. There was no neutral ground. From that moment, he became ruthless with his time. He cut down on social media, stopped binge-watching shows, even turned off notifications on his phone. Every minute he reclaimed became fuel for his growth. One Saturday morning, his younger brother, Ethan, joined him for coffee. "Bro," Ethan said, shaking his head. "You've changed so much. You even sound different." Ryan laughed. "Different how?" "You sound certain. Like you know where you're going." Ryan leaned back, smiling. "That's because I stopped waiting for direction. I decided to create it." That statement hung in the air, powerful and simple. Ethan didn't reply, but Ryan could see the spark in his brother's eyes, the same one he'd felt months earlier. Maybe his journey wasn't just about himself anymore. Maybe it was about lighting torches for others still lost in the dark. That night, Ryan reflected on his past and smiled at how far he'd come. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being consistent. The mornings were still tough. The temptations still called. But the difference now was that he had momentum. And momentum, once built, becomes its own motivation. He closed his notebook and wrote one final line for the night. "I don't need to be faster than everyone else. I just need to keep moving when others stop." Then he turned off the light, knowing tomorrow the journey would continue, and so would the education. Because learning, he realized, was not something you do to get ahead. It's something you do to stay alive. Chapter 3. The Knowledge Gap. The air felt different that morning. Crisp, awake. As Ryan stepped out of his apartment and into the sunrise, he realized something remarkable. He was no longer dragging himself through the day. He was meeting it. What once felt like an endless cycle of monotony was now a mission. He no longer counted days by tasks or hours. He counted them by lessons. Each morning was an opportunity to sharpen his mind, to take one more step ahead of the version of himself still sleeping in an alternate timeline, the version that had never started. But as his self-education deepened, a new truth emerged. The more he learned, the more he realized how little he actually knew. And that's when he encountered the knowledge gap. It started one morning when he was listening to a podcast on emotional intelligence. The host said, "The biggest barrier to growth isn't ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge." Ryan paused the episode and let the words sink in. The illusion of knowledge. He thought back to how he used to believe he knew enough about life, work, and success. He'd skimmed articles, watched motivational clips, and assumed that made him educated. But now, he saw the difference between consumption and comprehension, between knowing words and living wisdom. This realization was both humbling and empowering. Humbling because he saw how far he still had to go. Empowering because he knew he was finally on the right path. At work, his colleagues began to treat him differently. Not because he was showing off, he never mentioned his early mornings or his notebook, but because his mindset radiated through everything he did. He asked better questions in meetings. He listened with intention. When others panicked over deadlines, he stayed calm and analytical. One day, his boss, Mr. Kent, pulled him aside after a presentation. "Ryan," he said, adjusting his glasses, "you've grown a lot lately. You've become more strategic. What's changed?" Ryan smiled. "I started studying people who think differently." Mr. Kent nodded, intrigued. "Keep that up. Thinking differently is what changes everything." Those words stuck with Ryan like a secret code. Think differently. That night, Ryan dug deeper into a new subject: cognitive biases. He discovered how human beings often make emotional decisions disguised as logic. He was fascinated by how simple awareness could shift outcomes. The next morning, he tested this knowledge. Instead of reacting to a coworker's criticism, he paused, observed, and responded calmly. Later, the coworker apologized for being harsh. Ryan grinned. This was more than education, this was evolution. But growth, he learned, also brought discomfort. The more he advanced, the more he noticed how little interest others had in self-improvement. During lunch breaks, coworkers discussed TV shows, gossip, or politics. Nothing that expanded their minds. When he tried to share something insightful, they'd nod politely and change the subject. At first, it frustrated him. But then he remembered something from a book he'd read. You can't force people to grow. You can only inspire them by example. So he stopped preaching and started being. He focused on living his lessons, not talking about them. And slowly, people began to notice. One afternoon, a junior employee approached him nervously. "Hey, Ryan, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Ryan replied. "I see you always reading and learning. How do you stay so consistent?" Ryan smiled. "I treat learning like breathing. It's not optional." The young man nodded slowly, eyes bright with curiosity. That single conversation reminded Ryan of his own beginnings. The version of himself who once searched for answers in random videos. He realized he was no longer just a learner. He was becoming a teacher by example. The knowledge gap wasn't just about realizing what he didn't know. It was about understanding that learning never ends. The smartest people weren't those who had all the answers, but those who kept asking better questions. That insight became his third rule. Stay curious longer than others stay comfortable. It became his daily reminder to never settle, never assume mastery, and never stop exploring new mental territory. As the months rolled on, Ryan expanded his power hour beyond books and podcasts. He started attending webinars, taking online courses, and joining communities of lifelong learners. At first, it was intimidating. Everyone seemed smarter, more experienced. But he soon noticed something incredible. Even the experts were still learning. No one acted like they'd arrived. They were explorers, not know-it-alls. That realization shifted Ryan's mindset forever. Success wasn't a destination. It was a rhythm. Every day you either learned forward or you fell backward. There was no stillness in growth. Subhook. One evening, while journaling, Ryan wrote down a question that would shape the rest of his journey. What am I preparing myself for? He didn't know the answer yet. But deep down, he sensed that education was building something bigger. A future opportunity that would require everything he was learning now. That thought electrified him. The daily lessons were no longer just habits. They were weapons being forged for battles not yet seen. He began to study with more urgency, more purpose. Every new skill felt like another piece of armor being added to his destiny. The transformation was visible to those around him. His conversations became sharper. His focus unshakable. Even Marcus, his skeptical friend, started texting him articles and asking for advice. Ryan realized that true education doesn't just elevate your life, it pulls others up with you. But the deeper he dove into self-development, the more he noticed a new challenge rising on the horizon. One that threatened to undo his progress if left unchecked. A silent enemy that whispered through every distraction, every shortcut, every cheap dopamine hit. It was the comfort trap, the temptation to rest just because things were improving. And Ryan knew that if he didn't confront it soon, he might lose everything he'd built. He looked at his notebook that night, the one titled Project, Rebuild Myself. The pages were now filled with lessons, reflections, and quotes, a roadmap of his rebirth. He flipped to a clean page and wrote at the top, Chapter 4, The Comfort Trap. Then, beneath it, a reminder. When learning becomes easy, it's time to go harder. He closed the book, turned off the lamp, and smiled. He was no longer afraid of the knowledge gap. Because now, he understood that staying ahead of 99% of people wasn't about knowing more. It was about never stopping. Chapter 4, The Comfort Trap. Success has a sneaky way of whispering lies. It tells you you're doing enough. It pats you on the back and says, you've earned a break. Ryan didn't see it coming. He was still waking early, still reading, still learning. But something inside him had shifted. The hunger that once burned like wildfire had cooled into a quiet flicker. He had momentum now, results, even praise from his boss. For the first time, he felt comfortable. And that was the problem. It started subtly. One morning, he hit snooze. Just 10 minutes, he told himself. 10 turned into 30. He skipped his power hour that day, promising to catch up in the evening. But by the time evening came, fatigue had other plans. The next day, the same thing happened. Then the next. Within a week, Ryan had missed 4 mornings in a row. He still felt productive. He was working hard, meeting deadlines, but something was missing. His edge. His fire. His sense of forward motion. He had fallen into the comfort trap, and like quicksand, it pulled harder the more he tried to relax. That Friday, Ryan found himself scrolling through social media again. Something he hadn't done aimlessly in months. Everyone seemed to be succeeding faster than him. Entrepreneurs showing cars, influencers preaching habits, people posting highlight reels of lives he didn't believe were real. He felt that familiar whisper, maybe I'm not doing enough after all. It was ironic. He had been making the best progress of his life, yet now he was doubting everything. Comfort, he realized, wasn't just about resting. It was about losing direction. He shut off his phone and sat in silence. Then he asked himself out loud, "When did I stop being hungry?" The question stung because he already knew the answer. That weekend, Ryan visited his parents. His father, a retired teacher, sat with him on the porch. "You've changed, son," his father said, smiling. Ryan chuckled. "For the better, I hope." "Oh, definitely. But be careful. Growth is like climbing a mountain. The higher you go, the more tempting it is to stop and admire the view." Ryan tilted his head. "What happens if you stay too long?" His father looked out at the horizon. "The storm catches up." That line hit him deep. The storm catches up. He realized the storm wasn't failure or bad luck. It was stagnation. The moment you stop improving, the world doesn't wait. It moves on, quietly leaving you behind. The next morning, Ryan reignited his power hour. He woke up before dawn, poured coffee, and reopened his notebook. But this time, he didn't just learn, he reflected. He reviewed every note, every lesson from the past months. He underlined patterns and circled quotes that had shaped his mindset. One stood out in bold letters. "If you don't evolve, you dissolve." It wasn't about hustling harder. It was about staying awake in a world that constantly lulls people back to sleep. He decided it was time to level up. Ryan set a new challenge for himself. 90 days of relentless growth. Every day for 3 months, he would not only learn something new but apply it immediately. No passive consumption. Action-driven learning only. He started small. After reading about public speaking, he volunteered to lead a team presentation. After studying time management, he reorganized his daily schedule into 90-minute focus blocks. After listening to a podcast on negotiation, he applied the tactics during a vendor meeting and saved his company thousands. Each small win reignited the hunger he'd lost. The comfort trap was fading, replaced by a deeper sense of purpose. But growth, he discovered, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was invisible, seen only in the moments you chose discipline over distraction. One night, Marcus texted him, "Bro, we're going out. You in?" Ryan stared at the message. He wanted to say yes, but it was his study hour, and he was midway through a course on emotional mastery. He typed, "Can't tonight. Got class." Marcus replied with a laughing emoji. "Still on that self-education stuff?" Ryan smiled. Always. He wasn't judging his friend. He'd just changed frequencies. And the higher he climbed, the quieter it became. That's when he learned another powerful truth. Comfort often disguises itself as balance. Balance sounds noble, but sometimes it's just fear wearing a polite face. Fear of going further, fear of outgrowing those around you, fear of being different. Subhook. A few weeks into his 90-day challenge, Ryan faced a moment that tested everything. He was offered a promotion, a big one. More money, more responsibility, more hours. Everyone congratulated him. But deep down, he felt uneasy. The new role would eat into his learning time, his growth hours, his personal space to evolve. That night, he paced his apartment, thinking. The safe choice was to take it. The smart choice was to evaluate it. He opened his notebook and wrote 2 questions. Will this make me grow or just make me busy? Is this progress or comfort disguised as success? By midnight, he had his answer. He declined the offer. His boss was stunned. Ryan, this could be your big break. Ryan smiled softly. I'm not chasing breaks. I'm building foundations. That decision changed him forever. It wasn't about rejecting opportunity. It was about choosing alignment over approval. The next morning, he wrote a new line in his journal. Comfort kills ambition faster than failure ever could. That became his mantra. Whenever he felt lazy, he repeated it like a battle cry. He began to push himself again, not recklessly but deliberately. Harder books, deeper learning, more complex ideas. He sought out mentors, joined discussions, and even started mentoring others who wanted to grow. The student was becoming a guide, yet he never lost his learner's heart. One night, after finishing a book on leadership, Ryan stood by his window and looked at the glowing city below. He whispered to himself, "Most people stop when it starts working. That's when I'll accelerate." And he did. Day by day, he turned the discomfort of growth into a source of energy. Every challenge became fuel. Every failure became feedback. The comfort trap had once almost claimed him. But now he understood. Comfort wasn't a place to live. It was a checkpoint to pass through. He smiled, wrote one final note in his journal, and underlined it twice. The climb never ends. It just gets higher. That night, Ryan didn't feel tired. He felt ready. Because he knew what was coming next, a level of transformation that would demand everything he'd learned so far. And this time, he wasn't afraid of the storm. He was becoming the lightning. Chapter 5. The Breakthrough Mindset. It was a Sunday morning, quiet, peaceful, and heavy with possibility. Ryan sat by the window, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands, sunlight spilling across his notes. His journal had grown thick now, each page a testimony of consistency, each word a footprint of transformation. But as he flipped through his earlier entries, something dawned on him. He wasn't just learning anymore. He was thinking differently. His mind, once reactive and uncertain, now moved with clarity and confidence. He was developing what he called the breakthrough mindset, the ability to see obstacles as raw materials for progress. It began with a shift in how he perceived failure. Before, failure had been a verdict, a stop sign. Now it was a teacher. When something didn't work, he no longer sulked. He studied it. He dissected it. He asked, "What is this trying to teach me?" That one question became his mental key. Soon, every setback turned into data. Every rejection became research. Every mistake became a lesson written in invisible ink. He stopped fearing errors because he understood that those who avoid failure also avoid wisdom. And that was the moment his self-education evolved from information intake to transformation in action. At work, the results became undeniable. His department's performance metrics began to soar. Deadlines were met earlier. Efficiency improved. When a new project faced a technical issue, Ryan didn't panic. He broke it down, studied the problem, and guided his team through it. His calm confidence became contagious. People started coming to him for advice, not just on work but on mindset. "How do you stay so positive when things go wrong?" a colleague asked one afternoon. Ryan smiled. "I stopped trying to control everything. I just control my growth." The colleague blinked. "Control your growth?" "Yeah," Ryan continued. "You can't stop the storm, but you can always build a better ship." That line spread around the office like wildfire. Even his boss began quoting it. Outside of work, Ryan's transformation was just as profound. His evenings were no longer consumed by distractions or fatigue. Instead, he used them to reflect, plan, and connect dots between what he was learning and how he was living. He noticed patterns others missed: how emotional control affected productivity, how reading biographies improved leadership empathy, how financial literacy gave mental freedom. Every book, every podcast, every journal entry was shaping a sharper, stronger, more strategic version of himself. And that's when it hit him. The reason most people stay behind isn't because they lack potential. It's because they never reprogram how they think. They learn facts, but never build frameworks. To test this new understanding, Ryan created his next personal challenge. Think bigger for 30 days. Every day he would take one ordinary problem, personal or professional, and ask himself what would the top 1% do differently here. When a client rejected his proposal, he didn't sulk. He studied why. When a personal goal lagged, he redefined the system. When time felt short, he restructured priorities instead of complaining about hours. By day 10, the shift was dramatic. He realized success wasn't about working harder. It was about thinking on higher levels. One day, while leaving the office, Ryan bumped into Marcus again. "Man, you're unstoppable these days," Marcus laughed. "You never take a break." Ryan grinned. "I do. I just use breaks to refocus instead of escape." Marcus chuckled but looked thoughtful. "You really believe all this self-education stuff can change everything?" Ryan looked him in the eye. "It already has. And the more I learn, the luckier I get." Marcus didn't reply, but something shifted in his expression. For the first time, he didn't laugh. He listened. A few weeks later, Ryan faced one of his biggest professional challenges yet. His company was pitching for a high-stakes contract worth millions, and Ryan was asked to present. It was intimidating. The room would be filled with executives, investors, and people who'd been in the industry longer than he'd been alive. But this time, he didn't feel small. He felt ready. He spent nights studying persuasion, presentation skills, and strategic storytelling. Every concept he'd been learning for months came together like puzzle pieces. On the day of the pitch, his heart raced, but his mind was calm. He spoke with clarity, confidence, and conviction. He didn't try to impress. He tried to impact. When he finished, there was a pause, that electric silence before applause. Then the room erupted. Ryan smiled, not because of the applause, but because he knew why it worked. His preparation had met opportunity. That's what education really is. Training for moments you haven't met yet. Subhook. That night, alone in his apartment, Ryan stood before the mirror and stared at his reflection. He thought about the man who had once felt stuck, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, waiting for life to change. Now he was building life with his own two hands. One lesson, 1 hour, one mindset at a time. He whispered to himself, "I'm not chasing success anymore. I'm designing it." That's when it truly sank in. Breakthroughs aren't events. They're habits stacked over time until one day, the dam breaks and everything flows. The following morning, Ryan wrote his 4th rule in his journal. Your life expands in proportion to your mindset. He underlined it twice. This was no longer just about staying ahead of others. It was about staying ahead of himself. He began applying the breakthrough mindset to everything. Health, relationships, communication, finances. He approached each domain as a student and strategist. His curiosity became endless. His confidence unshakable. The more he learned, the more doors opened, both externally and internally. And somewhere deep within, a voice whispered, "This is only the beginning." But life, as it always does, had its next lesson waiting. Just when Ryan thought he had mastered his mind, a new challenge appeared, one that no amount of reading or preparation could prevent. It would test his emotional strength, his purpose, and his belief in the power of learning itself. And when that moment arrived, Ryan would discover that the real exam in life isn't written on paper. It's written in the choices you make when everything falls apart. He closed his journal, exhaled deeply, and smiled. He was no longer the same man who once woke up dreading the day. He had built momentum. He had built mindset. And most importantly, he had built himself. Tomorrow the journey would continue. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of gratitude. Because he finally understood the secret. You don't wait for breakthroughs. You become them. Chapter 6. When everything falls apart. The rain came without warning. Thick, heavy drops slamming against the windows as Ryan sat alone in the office. The city outside, usually alive with the sound of ambition, felt muted, drowned beneath a gray sky. It had been the longest week of his year. The big contract he'd won, the one that had promised expansion and recognition, had fallen apart. The client had backed out at the last minute due to internal restructuring. Months of planning, effort, and sleepless nights evaporated in a single email. And to make it worse, some people at work started whispering that Ryan had aimed too high. "That's what happens when you get overconfident," someone had said when they thought he wasn't listening. For the first time in months, the flame inside him flickered. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, the rain echoing his thoughts. Everything he'd built seemed fragile now, like glass that could shatter with one wrong move. That night, he didn't open a book. He didn't journal. He just sat there in silence, feeling the weight of failure pressing against his chest. "Maybe they're right," he muttered under his breath. "Maybe I've been fooling myself." But then a quiet memory surfaced. His father's voice from years ago. "Son, storms don't test your roof. They test your foundation." He smiled faintly. His foundation, that was what this moment was about. The foundation he had been building every single day through discipline, self-education, and growth. If he could only see failure as data before, now he needed to see pain as a teacher. He picked up his pen, opened his journal, and wrote just one line. "Every fall is a form of feedback." The next morning, Ryan showed up early to work. He wasn't there to prove anything to anyone. He was there to prove something to himself. He began studying where the deal had gone wrong, every email, every presentation note, every meeting summary. He didn't search for someone to blame. He searched for insight. And slowly, clarity began to form. The proposal had been too ambitious for the client's current stage. He had assumed they wanted transformation when they were only ready for transition. That realization stung, but it was gold. He had learned that success wasn't just about being right, it was about being aligned. That insight became his new principle. Even the best idea fails when it meets the wrong readiness. A week later, Marcus approached him. "You okay, man? You've been quiet lately." Ryan nodded. "Yeah. Processing." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Processing." Ryan smiled faintly. "When everything falls apart, most people panic. I prefer to process." Marcus laughed. "You never stop being the philosopher, do you?" Ryan chuckled. "No. Just a student of life." As the days passed, Ryan began to notice how easily people quit when things got hard. They stopped trying. They stopped learning. They stopped believing. But what separated the top 1% wasn't immunity from failure. It was immunity from giving up. He remembered something he'd read months ago. The moment you want to quit is the moment your old life is trying to pull you back. That became his anchor. He turned pain into a project. Every evening, after work, he analyzed not only the failed deal but his own reactions. His thoughts, his emotions, his decisions. He was dissecting the anatomy of resilience. By the third week, something shifted. The fog began to lift. The same failure that had crushed his confidence was now sharpening his strategy. Then came an unexpected email. A new client, larger than the previous one, had heard about his innovative presentation style and wanted to collaborate. Ryan stared at the screen, almost laughing. It felt poetic. Life was rewarding his persistence, not his perfection. When he walked into the new client meeting, he carried not the arrogance of success, but the humility of wisdom. He presented calmly, honestly, and with renewed clarity. This time, his words landed perfectly, because they came from experience, not excitement. When the deal was confirmed, his boss shook his hand firmly. "You really are different, Ryan. Most people would have quit after the first loss." Ryan simply replied, "Most people stop learning when things hurt. I don't." Subhook. That night, Ryan returned home and looked at his reflection in the mirror again. He didn't see a man who had failed. He saw a man who had fallen and learned to rise differently. He whispered, "Resilience is the degree to which learning continues under pressure." He realized that all his books, notes, and podcasts were valuable, but none of them could have taught him what pain just did. This was real education, the kind that doesn't come from pages, but from persistence. Over the next few months, Ryan noticed another transformation. He had become more empathetic. He began mentoring new employees, helping them navigate their challenges. He spoke at small workshops about the power of self-education and resilience. One evening, a young intern asked him, "How do you stay motivated when things fall apart?" Ryan smiled. "I don't stay motivated," he said. "I stay educated. Motivation fades, but learning keeps you moving." The intern nodded, eyes wide with realization. Ryan continued, "When life hits hard, don't look for inspiration, look for instruction. Every setback has a skill hidden inside it." He began integrating reflection breaks into his schedule. Small 15-minute blocks after every major task where he would ask 3 questions. What worked? What failed? What did I learn? This simple habit turned ordinary days into mini-lessons. It kept his mind sharp and his emotions steady. And he realized something profound. People aren't destroyed by failure, they're destroyed by lack of reflection. Without reflection, failure feels like the end. With reflection, it becomes evolution. Weeks later, Ryan was invited to a leadership seminar to speak about growth through adversity. Standing before the crowd, he took a deep breath and began, "Education isn't about what you learn when life is calm. It's about who you become when life collapses." He shared his story, the rise, the fall, the rebuilding. By the end of his talk, people weren't just inspired, they were activated. They lined up to thank him, ask questions, and share their own experiences. Ryan realized he wasn't just growing anymore. He was helping others grow too. That night, lying in bed, he smiled at the ceiling. Failure hadn't broken him. It had built him. It had stripped away pride, comfort, and assumptions, leaving behind something purer, purpose. He whispered his 5th rule into the dark. Pain is the tuition of progress. And as he drifted to sleep, a quiet certainty settled in his chest. He was no longer afraid of things falling apart. Because he now knew, when everything collapses, it's only clearing space for something greater to rise. Chapter 7. Building Unstoppable Habits. The morning sun pierced through the blinds, scattering streaks of gold across Ryan's desk. The city was waking up, but Ryan had already been awake for hours. His journal lay open beside a half-empty mug of coffee, and a faint smile curved on his face as he read his own handwriting. Consistency is the architect of transformation. That sentence wasn't just a quote anymore. It was his blueprint. Over the past year, Ryan had reinvented himself from the inside out, but he knew now that growth wasn't an event. It wasn't one grand achievement or a moment of inspiration. It was what happened quietly, repetitively, behind the scenes. It was the power of habits. When he thought back, it was habits that had carried him through storms. The daily journaling, the reading, the reflections, the small routines that gave structure to chaos. So one morning, Ryan made a decision. He would systemize his success. No more relying on motivation. No more waiting to feel ready. He would make progress automatic, something that happened whether he was inspired or not. He called this new phase Operation Automation. He began with 3 pillars: learning, action, reflection. Every day would include all 3, no matter what. Morning, learning, 1 chapter, 1 podcast, or 1 lesson from someone smarter. Daytime, action, applying something he learned. Evening, reflection, what worked, what didn't, what to improve. It was simple, but that simplicity was deceptive, because what most people ignored was that habits, once locked in, became superpowers. As weeks passed, Ryan began to notice subtle magic. He no longer had to try to be disciplined. It was automatic. The hard part wasn't starting anymore. It was stopping. He realized that motivation is like a spark, but habits are the firewood. Without one, the other dies too soon. One evening, Marcus joined him for coffee. "Man, you're like a machine lately," Marcus said. half in awe, half in jest. "Don't you ever rest?" Ryan chuckled. "Rest is part of the plan. I don't burn out, I schedule energy." Marcus laughed. "Schedule energy? You sound like a productivity guru now." Ryan smiled. "No, just someone who finally learned that time doesn't make progress. Habits do." Marcus nodded slowly, thoughtful. "So, what's your secret?" Ryan leaned forward. "I stopped negotiating with myself." Marcus blinked. "Meaning?" Ryan shrugged. "Every time you negotiate with discipline, comfort wins. So I made it non-negotiable." That line hit Marcus like lightning. He didn't say a word, but his expression said everything. Respect, maybe even a hint of envy. As days turned into weeks, Ryan started seeing habits as building blocks of character. Each small commitment was a brick. Each repeated action was cement. Slowly, those bricks were forming something strong and permanent. A mindset fortress. He started applying this philosophy to every area of life. Fitness, finances, focus, relationships, communication. Everything had a system. He even created his own daily 1% rule. Do one small thing each day that improves your life by 1%. It didn't matter if it was reading 3 pages, saving a few dollars, cleaning a workspace, or learning one new skill. 1% compounded every day would outperform anyone waiting for a miracle. He smiled when he realized this was the secret of the top 1%. They didn't wait for big breaks. They built small ones daily. Subhook. But of course, even unstoppable habits come with friction. Ryan discovered that consistency wasn't about perfection. It was about returning. Some mornings he woke up exhausted. Some days he missed his reading. Sometimes life's noise got too loud. But instead of quitting, he had a rule. Never miss twice. Miss a day? Fine. But the next day, no excuses. This single rule prevented spiral-down moments. It kept his momentum alive. And with that, his confidence grew. Not because life got easier, but because he got stronger. One night, Ryan reflected on the difference between his old self and his current one. The old Ryan used to dream of changing his life someday. The new Ryan changed his life every day. He realized how subtle the transformation had been, like how a river carves through stone not by force, but by persistence. He whispered, "Habits are proof that small choices create big identities." That truth hit him deeply, because everything he admired in successful people, focus, calmness, clarity, wasn't luck or talent. It was rhythm. It was repetition. It was the music of discipline. At work, people started noticing. His team began mirroring his consistency. Meetings became sharper. Productivity rose. Even Marcus started journaling and reading daily. Ryan had accidentally started a movement. He saw it clearly now. Leadership wasn't about telling people what to do. It was about becoming the kind of person they wanted to emulate. That was the invisible influence of habits. Later that month, Ryan was invited to a local entrepreneur meetup to speak about his growth journey. Standing before the audience, he said, "Habits are your silent partners. They either build you or bury you." The crowd nodded. He continued, "Most people think discipline is about restriction. It's not. It's about freedom, the freedom to live without chaos, regret, or confusion." The room went silent. He could feel the impact. He finished with a simple line. Motivation gets you started. Habits get you ahead. After the event, a young woman approached him. "I've been trying to change my life for years," she said softly. "But I always lose momentum. How do you stay so consistent?" Ryan smiled warmly. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "Don't ask how to stay consistent. Ask how to make quitting harder." She frowned slightly. "Make quitting harder?" "Exactly," Ryan said. "Build systems around you, reminders, accountability. environments that push you forward. If you make success easy and failure inconvenient, you'll always win. The woman nodded slowly, her eyes shining with hope. That night back home, Ryan wrote in his journal, Rule 6. Build systems that survive bad days. He underlined it twice. Because he knew it wasn't enough to be strong when motivated. He needed habits strong enough to carry him when motivation vanished. He stared out the window at the glowing city lights and whispered, habits don't just build results. They build resilience. For the first time he felt something profound, peace. Not excitement, not adrenaline, but deep, quiet confidence. He no longer wondered if he'd succeed. He knew it was inevitable, because he had designed success into his days. As he turned off the lamp, he thought about the next chapter of his life. Habits had made him unstoppable, but he sensed there was something even greater beyond consistency. Influence. He had built himself. Now he would begin building others. Because true success, he realized, isn't staying ahead of 99% of people. It's helping others rise with you. And with that thought, he fell asleep smiling, ready for the next morning, ready to keep educating, learning, and leading. Chapter 8. Leading Through Learning. The conference hall buzzed with quiet anticipation. Rows of eager faces filled the seats, entrepreneurs, students, professionals, all gathered for a seminar titled Learning for Leadership. Ryan stood backstage, adjusting his cufflinks. The same man who once dreaded Mondays was now the keynote speaker. He smiled, remembering how it had started. A book, a decision, a commitment to learn every day. And now, here he was, proof that education could rebuild a life from the inside out. He took a deep breath, feeling the hum of energy around him. The host introduced him, and as Ryan walked onto the stage, the applause felt like a heartbeat. Loud, alive, real. He looked at the audience and began. A few years ago, I was just another person drifting through my days, waiting for life to get better. Then I learned something simple. Life doesn't improve when you wish harder. It improves when you learn faster. The crowd leaned in. He had their attention. Over the next hour, Ryan spoke not from notes, but from experience. He told them about his failures, his self-education journey, his mindset transformation, and the habits that changed everything. But what struck people most was his humility. He didn't present himself as a guru, just a learner who refused to stop learning. He ended with a line that drew applause from the back rows to the front. The best leaders aren't those who know everything. They're the ones who keep learning when everyone else stops. After the event, people crowded around him. Some wanted photos, others wanted advice. But one young man lingered quietly at the edge of the group. When the crowd thinned, Ryan noticed him. "Hey," Ryan said, smiling. "You look like you've got something on your mind." The young man hesitated. "Honestly, yeah. I've been stuck. I keep trying to improve, but it feels like I'm not built for success. Like other people have something I don't." Ryan nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. I used to think the same thing, until I realized success isn't something you're built with. It's something you build through learning." The man looked up, curious. "So you're saying anyone can do it?" Ryan grinned. "Anyone who's willing to stay curious longer than they stay comfortable." The man laughed softly. "That's actually good." "Start small," Ryan said. 1 page a day. 1 podcast. 1 lesson. Don't aim for perfect. Aim for progress." The man smiled, nodded, and shook his hand. "Thanks. I think I needed to hear that." As Ryan watched him walk away, something clicked. He realized that growth wasn't meant to end with you. It was meant to flow through you. Learning, when shared, multiplied. Leadership wasn't about commanding. It was about educating. That night, Ryan wrote his next rule in his journal. Teach what you learn. The fastest way to master something is to share it. He began mentoring his colleagues more deliberately. Every week, he hosted a 30-minute learning huddle, a casual session where anyone could share what they'd learned that week. At first, only a few showed up. But soon, the sessions grew. People began bringing ideas, resources, and reflections. The atmosphere changed. Curiosity became culture. The company's productivity began rising. But even more importantly, morale soared. People didn't just show up to work, they showed up to grow. Marcus, watching all this unfold, approached Ryan one afternoon. "You've changed the whole vibe here, man. It's like people actually care again." Ryan smiled. That's the power of shared learning. When people grow, they stop competing and start collaborating. Marcus grinned. "You should trademark that." Ryan laughed. "Maybe someday." Then Marcus added, "You ever think about leading a team officially? You've already been doing it." Ryan paused. He hadn't thought about it that way. He was just helping people learn, but maybe that was leadership in its purest form. Weeks later, Ryan was promoted to a leadership position. Not because he chased it, but because he had become the kind of person it was natural to follow. His first move as a leader wasn't to change policies. It was to change perspectives. He gathered his team and said, "I'm not here to manage you. I'm here to grow with you. We win by learning and we learn by trying." The team looked surprised at first, but within months, their synergy was unmatched. They brainstormed better, adapted faster, and handled pressure with calm focus. Ryan had created something rare, a learning-driven environment in a world obsessed with results. Subhook. But with influence came responsibility. Ryan started noticing a challenge creeping in. People looked up to him so much that they sometimes forgot their own inner compass. He didn't want blind followers. He wanted independent thinkers. So he began teaching how to think, not what to think. He asked questions that made people reflect. What did this experience teach you? What could we do differently next time? What's the one insight you gained from this mistake? He wasn't just leading a team, he was cultivating leaders. Soon, Ryan was invited to speak at larger events. Each time he refined his message, that learning wasn't a school activity, it was a lifestyle. He told audiences, leadership isn't a title you're given. It's a mindset you earn through daily self-education. People resonated with his story because it wasn't about overnight success. It was about the long game, the daily grind, the steady rise. And through it all, Ryan stayed humble. After every talk, he'd jot down what went well and what could be better. Even as others saw him as an expert, he saw himself as a student. One night, after a particularly impactful seminar, he returned home to find a message waiting in his inbox. It was from the same young man he'd met months earlier. He'd started a small online community for personal growth and wanted to thank Ryan for inspiring him. Ryan smiled as he read the message. "You helped me believe that learning can change everything. Now I'm helping others believe the same." He sat back, heart full. That was it, the real measure of success. Not how far you go, but how many you take with you. That night, as he closed his journal, Ryan wrote, Rule 7. Leadership is the echo of your learning. He underlined it 3 times. He realized that his mission had evolved. It was no longer about staying ahead of 99% of people. It was about lifting 99% of people to rise with him. Because when you educate yourself daily, you don't just build a better life, you build a better world. Before turning off the lights, he whispered to himself, "I used to chase progress. Now I create ripple effects." And as he drifted off to sleep, he felt it deeply. He was no longer the student trying to survive. He was the mentor helping others thrive. And yet, deep within him, a spark whispered, "There's still more to learn." Because real leaders never arrive. They just keep evolving. Chapter 9. The Ripple Effect. The morning air carried a cool stillness, the kind that whispers of new beginnings. Ryan sat on a park bench, notebook in hand, watching as the city around him began to stir. Joggers passed, cars rolled by, and children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby playground. For a moment, he just breathed it in, the rhythm of life, steady and alive. Then his phone buzzed. Another message. Then another. He opened his inbox and found dozens of emails. From people across different countries. Some were entrepreneurs, other students, a few full-time parents. All of them wrote with gratitude, sharing how his story and lessons had sparked changes in their own lives. One message read, "I started reading every morning because of your videos. It's been only 3 weeks, but I already feel like a different person." Another said, "Your learn, act, reflect. Method saved my business during tough times." Ryan's eyes lingered on one line that seemed to glow off the screen. "You don't know me, but your learning became my turning point." He set his phone down slowly, heart full. This was the real reason behind everything. Not the recognition, not the title, but the ripple effect. The proof that growth, when shared, multiplies. Later that day, Ryan met Marcus for lunch. "You're going viral, man," Marcus laughed, sliding into the booth. "Your posts, your talks, everyone's quoting you now. How does it feel being the education guy?" Ryan grinned. "Strange, honestly. I never planned any of this. I just kept sharing what I was learning." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Funny how the things we do for ourselves end up helping everyone else." "Exactly," Ryan said. "That's the ripple. You improve yourself and suddenly others start improving too, sometimes without you even knowing." As weeks passed, Ryan noticed these ripples everywhere. A team member started a 5 a.m. club at work. An intern launched a book-sharing corner in the break room. Marcus began mentoring younger employees, passing on lessons he'd learned from Ryan. It wasn't about influence anymore. It was about inspiration. Ryan realized that the best way to change the world wasn't by preaching or pushing, but by becoming the example people didn't know they needed. That night, he wrote in his journal, "You can't push people to grow. You can only grow so visibly that they're inspired to follow." He smiled. That sentence felt like the essence of everything he'd learned so far. Soon after, Ryan was invited to lead a regional workshop titled Growth Without Permission. The theme was simple. You don't need approval to improve. The auditorium was packed. As Ryan spoke, he could see it, the spark in people's eyes when realization hit. The moment someone in the back row whispered "wow" under their breath. The slow nods. The tears of clarity. He didn't teach them theories. He shared transformation. You don't need a degree to educate yourself, he told them. You don't need applause to keep growing. All you need is the decision to keep learning, every single day. By the time he finished, the entire audience stood in applause. Subhook. After the event, an elderly man approached him, walking slowly with a cane. "I'm 73, the man said, "and I thought my learning days were over. But you reminded me, curiosity has no age." Ryan felt emotion catch in his throat. "It's never too late," he said softly. The man smiled. "Then maybe it's time for me to start again." That conversation stayed with Ryan long after. It was proof. Education wasn't just for the young or ambitious. It was for anyone still breathing and willing to grow. A few months later, Ryan's company was featured in a major magazine for its culture of continuous learning. The journalist interviewed several employees, all of whom credited Ryan for starting the movement. But when the article came out, Ryan didn't focus on his name. He focused on the stories. The people who had once felt stuck now spoke about progress. The ones who dreaded Mondays now looked forward to challenges. He smiled as he read. This was it. His impact was no longer measured by personal achievements but by collective awakening. Around that time, he received an invitation to partner with a nonprofit that aimed to bring personal development programs to underserved communities. They wanted him to design workshops that could help young people build confidence and purpose through learning. He didn't hesitate. He said yes. In those community sessions, Ryan saw hunger, not for money, but for direction. He spoke to teenagers who had been told they'd never make it, single mothers trying to restart their lives, young men lost in distraction. And every time he shared his story, he watched the same spark light up, that moment of realization that growth was possible, no matter where you started. He ended each session with the same words. Your past is a lesson, not a label. The moment you start learning again, you start living again. Months rolled by, and the ripples widened. Ryan began receiving letters from schools, companies, and even prison programs that had implemented his learning frameworks. He had started as one man on a journey to improve himself. Now, his message was transforming thousands. But through it all, he stayed grounded. He still woke up early, still read daily, still journaled every night. Because he knew, the ripple must never outgrow the source. You don't inspire others by being perfect. You inspire them by being consistent. One evening, after a long day of speaking and mentoring, Ryan stood on his balcony, watching the sun dip below the skyline. He whispered, "It's amazing what happens when you just keep learning." Then, almost as if life wanted to test his humility, his phone buzzed with a message from his mentor. The very man whose book had started Ryan's journey years ago. It read, "Proud of how far you've come, Ryan. Remember, leaders are just students who refuse to stop learning." Ryan smiled wide. That one message felt like a full circle. The student had become a teacher. And yet, in truth, he was still both. That night, he opened his journal and wrote his 8th rule. True impact isn't measured by how many follow you. It's measured by how many rise because of you. He paused, then added one more line beneath it. Be the spark that ignites others to light their own fire. As he closed the book, he thought about the ripple effect. How one choice, one book, one habit could silently shift the destiny of countless people. He realized something profound. Staying ahead of 99% of people wasn't about outpacing them. It was about uplifting them. Because when you educate yourself daily, your growth becomes contagious. And that, Ryan knew, was the real purpose of learning. The city lights shimmered below as Ryan whispered to the stars. I started this journey to find myself. Now I see, I was meant to help others find themselves too. He smiled, knowing deep down that the ripple would continue. Long after him, in lives he'd never meet, in minds he'd never see, in futures he'd silently helped rewrite. And that was enough. Chapter 10. The Infinite Student. The dawn broke with a quiet brilliance, spilling golden light across Ryan's apartment. He sat cross-legged on the floor, journal open, pen poised in hand. Outside, the city was waking, buzzing with ambition, distraction, and possibility. Ryan had learned a lot in the past months. More than he could have imagined. He had transformed from a man chasing progress into a man shaping it, from a student trying to survive into a leader inspiring others to thrive. And yet, as he looked at the morning sun, a simple truth struck him. He was still a student. That was the final lesson he had learned. The journey never ends. No matter the books read, the habits mastered, the people helped, the knowledge gained. The world always evolves, always shifts, and the moment you stop learning, you start falling behind. Ryan smiled at the irony. His whole life had become a paradox. The more he knew, the more he realized he didn't. He wrote in his journal, "The greatest leaders are always the greatest learners." It wasn't a theory. It was truth written in the ink of experience. That morning, he reviewed his routine. He woke up early as always, but now his mornings were not just about learning. They were about exploring. He experimented with new ideas, technologies, philosophies. He reached beyond comfort zones, asking questions he had once been too afraid to ask. The world had too many lessons to stay in the familiar. And Ryan had learned that curiosity was the compass to never-ending growth. He thought about the ripple effect, how his learning had started touching lives far beyond his immediate circle. That ripple would continue, yes, but Ryan understood it was only a part of the journey. The true power of self-education was not influence. It was transformation. Every lesson learned, every challenge faced, every failure overcome. These were the tools that built resilience, creativity, and courage. He had discovered that the world didn't reward comfort or talent alone. It rewarded prepared minds, consistent effort, and the courage to learn continuously. A notification pinged on his phone. It was Marcus. "Hey man, thinking of starting a side project. Can I pick your brain?" Ryan smiled. Marcus had started applying what he had learned. This was another ripple, smaller than the thousands of emails, but more intimate, more personal. "Of course," Ryan replied. "Let's talk ideas tonight." He realized that growth wasn't just a journey. It was a cycle. You learn, you share, you repeat. Each iteration made you sharper, wiser, and stronger. Ryan reflected on the earlier months, the comfort trap, the failures, the breakthroughs, the habits, the leadership, and the ripple effect. Every chapter of his life had been a teacher. And yet, the most valuable lesson was simple. There is no finish line. The infinite student doesn't measure success by trophies or titles. They measure it by their capacity to learn, adapt, and teach. He wrote his final rule in the journal. Never graduate from learning. Under it, he added, "The moment you think you know it all is the moment you start losing." He paused and looked out the window. The city stretched endlessly, full of opportunities, challenges, and unknown lessons. He felt excitement, not anxiety, because now, failure didn't frighten him. Setbacks didn't discourage him. The unknown didn't intimidate him. He had become fluent in the language of growth. That afternoon, Ryan went for a walk in the park. He observed life in motion, a businessman hurriedly checking his phone, a young woman sketching in her notebook, children running and laughing. Each of them was learning in their own way. Each of them was a student of life. He thought, we all have the same time in a day. The difference is how we use it. Ryan knew his journey was far from over. He still had mountains to climb, habits to refine, knowledge to acquire, people to inspire. And he loved it. The thrill wasn't in achieving an endpoint. It was in becoming better every day. Subhook. That evening, Ryan reflected on what had changed most. He had started as a man competing with 99% of people, striving to be ahead, striving to win. Now, he realized the true victory wasn't ahead of others. It was being ahead of his yesterday self. And the magic of education was this. The more he learned, the more he could give, and the more others rose alongside him. Ryan whispered to himself, education is infinite. Growth is infinite. Influence is infinite. He smiled as he wrote the final note in his journal. The infinite student never stops. The infinite student never fears. The infinite student never rests. And the infinite student never stops rising. That night, as he closed his eyes, he felt a calm certainty. He had become more than a student, more than a leader, more than a ripple maker. He had become a force of continuous growth. And the journey, his journey, would continue forever. Because the moment you stop learning is the moment life leaves you behind. And Ryan would never, ever stop.